We thought a good place to start would be with the editors. To kick off our webinar series, we decided to invite the editors of the 3 prominent journals in the international business and marketing fields to discuss key trends, topics, and issues in IB research, as well as the best practices for publishing in leading international business journals. Today, we're delighted to host Professor Ajai Gaur, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of World Business. And Ajai is a professor of international business and department vice chair in the Department of Management and Global Business at Rutgers University. Our second distinguished guest today is Professor Kelly Hewett, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Marketing. Kelly is from the University of Tennessee's Haslam College of Business. Our third panelist is Professor Vikas Kumar, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Management. Vikas is an associate professor in the discipline of international business and the chair of the discipline of international business at the University of Sydney Business School. Without further ado, I would like to hand the proverbial mic over to David, who will moderate this webinar. We would appreciate if you could write your questions to David directly and send to us via the chat function. David will monitor the chat box closely and group them and pose the questions to the editors. Enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. For today, please send your questions to me and I'll do my best to make sure we get them all in. What we'd like to do is kick off currently with our first speaker of the day. That's what everyone is here to hear. So Ajai, take it away.
You're on mute, Ajai.
Thank you very much, Ahmet and David, for organizing this event. Let me share my screen. You can see the first slide, Journal of World Business, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so I'm Ajai Gaur, editor for Journal of World Business. I teach at Rutgers Business School in New Jersey. What I'm going to do today is 3 things. Give you a very brief overview of Journal of World Business, in case some of you are not familiar with some of the recent changes that have happened with this journal. And then I'm going to also talk about some of the new initiatives in the broad theme of the new things which we as journal editors, at least at Journal of World Business, we are looking at with more interest amongst many other things. So I'll talk about that. And then I'll wind up with some tips about what is really rigorous international business research and how to succeed in publishing in IB journals, how to avoid test rejections and so on. Depending on the time, some of these things we'll discuss during the question and answer session. So for those of you who are less familiar with the Journal of World Business, it is one of the, sorry, this slide keeps moving. It is one of the oldest journals, older than the Journal of International Business Studies, 55 years now. It started as Columbia Journal of World Business. It's a journal of international business studies, and that's very important, something that I'll further elaborate. Because we receive a lot of papers which do not fit with the aims and scope of Journal of World Business, because perhaps they primarily focus on domestic issues, which is not the focus of Journal of World Business. So all submissions must have very explicit multinational, cross-border, or international competitive orientation. So that's one aspect. And then secondly, which is equally important, it is a study of management and organizations. And this is where we in fact differentiate with some of the other journals in the IB ecosystem that I'll talk a bit later. The papers that we publish in Journal of World Business are at the individual level or firm level. If your study is primarily at the country level, even if it is cross-country, then that is not something that would be of interest for Journal of World Business. Here are some of the topic areas, and as you can see, it's quite broad, from strategic management, organization theory, to things like marketing and consumer behavior. In fact, for a certain time period, about 10, 15 years, we were more focused and we were not taking finance and marketing papers. But now both finance and marketing areas, we have specific editors to deal with, these papers as well. Human resource management, so both macro side as well as, micro organizational side. And even though I have this global political economic environments, again, the focus has to be at the firm level issues or at the individuals within firms and not just, country level topics. Some data on the journal, our impact factor has been on the rise. You can see a lot of this information on the journal website. The bottom line is that Journal of World Business has emerged as clear one of the top 2 journals in the international business field, along with the Journal of International Business Studies, which is reflected by the impact factor, CIBERs score, rankings, and so on. All right, so that was very brief about the Journal of World Business. Now let me talk about some of the new initiatives, and I'm going to talk of these initiatives from the perspective of the editorial team as to how we see some of the problems in our field. This is a very recent article that I published, recalibrating management research, and I'm not going to go into very details of the problems that we see, but broadly speaking, we see 3 key issues in the field. First and foremost, our research seldom reaches a broad audience and lacks pivotal societal impact, too much dispersion, and somewhat problematic processes. And, for example, there's a study that showed that, if you want to publish in a leading management journal, the cost is, close to $400,000. And, oftentimes we take pride in saying that, I started working on this paper 10 years back. It took me 4 rounds of review, and a project that I started in 2010 got published in 2020. And there is value in rigor and so on. But that's also a little problematic, particularly when we are trying to make impact to the society and look at the problems which we face at hand. And if the solutions come 10 years later, then we need to relook at the processes that we are following. And that is what I'm going to focus the rest of my talk about with the help of some concrete steps and examples of things that we are doing at the Journal of World Business. So the first issue, which was about, at the topic of the slide, is R&R, not revise and resubmit in the traditional sense, but rigor and relevance, right? So the point that I made, one of the chronic problems, we are not looking at the issues which are of societal importance in a timely manner. We have come out with this idea of rolling calls, for which the topic will keep changing every 3 to 4 months. So currently the topic is sustainable development goals and multinational enterprises. And these rolling calls will go through rapid review process, only 21-day review cycle and only 1 round of review. So essentially what this means is you would be able to get your work out within a period of 2 to 3 months if you have rigorous work which is of direct relevance and importance for issues which we think are really important. So one of these calls is on UN SDGs. The next set of calls will be on topics such as the multinationals and future of work. Again, something which has been impacted by the pandemic, artificial intelligence, digital technologies, and internationalization. So these are some of the topics for future calls. Now, this rolling call is currently out. I think the deadline is June 30th, but this does not mean that people cannot submit articles on this particular topic beyond June 30th. It is to increase awareness that there are these journals out there which are very keen on this type of work on topics such as this, and they are willing to put out your work in a fast way rather than the traditional 3-4 years of review process. So it is to convey to the academic community, our readers, our writers, the intent of the journal. That is one of the objectives of this issue. So it's the same slide that I just showed you. The other, another chronic problem in our field is about the confidence that we have in the research that is coming out. And if you talk to the editors, every editor would say that replication is very important, and yet top journals do not publish replications. And we are again trying to address that head on. So we have initiated this replication corner. And again, it's part of the rolling call, but we keep extending it depending on how the academic community shows interest. And this initiative is specifically with the objective of publishing replication articles on replication of influential studies. So it's not that we are going to publish replication of every XYZ study, but the influential studies, depending on how authors justify previous studies as influential, if you do replications of those, again, those would be put through a rapid review process of 2 months, 3 months time, and they would be out in the Journal of World Business. Challenging the status quo, in the theme of some of the things that Journal of World Business is looking at, we had these 2 special issues which have very recently closed. But again, special issues are more to signal to the academic community, as I said earlier. So these 2 special issues were on challenging the orthodoxy in international business from the theoretical standpoint, looking at issues which we think should be looked at rather than simply the dated issues of just for example, internationalization performance relationships. So things like, new approaches to SDGs, decoupling and rethinking global value chains, deglobalization versus is it just de-Chinization versus re-westernization, what are these concepts and so on. So, you can look at it on the website, it's still there, but this is to challenge the orthodoxy and reinvigorate the field by infusing by encouraging scholars to look at topics which are of relevance for the international business field. And likewise for the methods, we do not have to be limited in the way in which we approach the problems that we have at hand. So we have this special issue on reconsidering, reconceptualizing and refashioning empirical methodology for IB research to incorporate a variety of things. Experimental studies, surveys are very, there have been studies based on surveys, but not recently, not very common, qualitative studies and so on. So that's another special issue where, again, to encourage and to convey to the market that this is something we are very much interested in. I believe I have a few more minutes, Ahmet.
Yep.
All right, just some examples, COVID topic, we very quickly published, several articles on this topic. Many of these have gone through that rapid review process. And I put up this slide just to show that it's not just, lip service, we are actually implementing it in real sense of implementing, having these articles out. Another chronic problem that authors often talk about, and editors also agree with those, is the long review process and the challenges of your paper gets rejected at a journal, and then you have to restart the process and so on. And we have actively worked to create this ecosystem of international business journals. 3 of these journals have sort of formal agreement: Journal of World Business, International Business Review, and Journal of International Management. Where we are doing very actively transferring articles across these journals. So for example, let's say you submit an article at Journal of World Business, which is a single country study and perhaps does not fit with the aims and scope of Journal of World Business. We might have sent it in the review process and it gets rejected because of some of these reasons of fit. We know that some of the other journals in this ecosystem, for example, JIM, take single country studies. So if an article is good, there's no reason to put that article in the review process afresh. It can be transferred along with the reviews from one journal to another journal. So that, let's say, across these 3 journals, if you were to try each journal separately, it will take you 3x amount of time, even if, the final outcome is reject. But with this article transfer service, we are trying to reduce that 3x time to maybe 1.5x, maybe 2x, right? So that, it's a good experience for authors, for reviewers. You don't have to review the same paper. Oftentimes reviewers receive the same paper from multiple journals, right? So providing a more pleasant experience to different stakeholders, while at the same time tackling some of these challenges of slowness in our process and the difficulties that authors face. Next 2 slides, what I have is something that can actually take a lot of time. So I'm going to very quickly just go through these points. What is rigorous IB research? And these things are quite in some way commonsensical. Identifying a good research question, which would require one to really understand who the audience is reading that journal in which we are trying to submit. Each journal has its own character. Utilizing methods that suit the research question. Oftentimes authors would say that qualitative studies are not accepted in IB journals. And the counter argument that I give is that, many of those studies are not properly done. You have to match the methods with the research question. Qualitative study should not be done just because it is difficult to obtain quantitative data. The research question has to match. It should be done because the processes that you're trying to identify, it would be more difficult to identify them with secondary data or quantitative data, and it would be easier to identify some of those processes by qualitative data, right? So matching your methods with the research question, understanding the phenomenon, what we are trying to, and this is particularly important for the international business field, the field being applied field. As authors, if we don't understand the phenomenon, then it's difficult to make a contribution which is of relevance. And of course, the results have to, you have to convince yourself that results is the best modeling of the situation. Alternatives, face validity, where your design is good and so on, and this is the process of consulting with your peers, sharing in conferences, for students consulting with their advisors and so on, right? So that's one aspect of it. And this is the last slide where I've put forth some of the most common reasons for desk rejection at the Journal of World Business. Writing quality, length, plagiarism, many times even senior scholars, because we write so much, sometimes you just share, take stuff from one paper to another paper. Very important, but we take care of, these things. Fit with a particular journal. As I already mentioned, single country versus multi-country sample, whether there is international business dimension in your paper. So reading the aims and scope of the journals which you are trying to submit, and not just recycling your papers. It gets rejected at one place, let me try it another place. That's one of the common reasons why articles would get desk rejected. Framing and engagement with the IB discourse, novelty, methodological rigor, the very standard things is what we look. And the reason it's important is because, for example, at Journal of World Business, our desk rejection rate is as high as about 65%. So in the earlier slide, I showed you, the acceptance rate of JWB is 6%. But if you take out the desk rejection, then the acceptance rate goes as high as 25%. So there's real chance of getting your paper in if you can take care of some of these very basic things while submitting your papers. Thank you. I hope I have stayed within the time.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ajai. Thank you. This was a great presentation, and I'm sure there will be questions about your presentation, and David would be collecting the questions, and then we'll be providing a summary, and then we'll get back to you
Absolutely.
Later with the specific questions. Our next editor is Kelly Hewett from the Journal of International Marketing, and I'm looking forward to your presentation as well, Kelly. This is really amazing. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ahmet. And I'm fortunate to follow Ajai. I think we have a lot in common in the way we approach editing a journal. And my plan today is to do something similar, and I'm going to spend about half of my time kind of digging into what the Journal of International Marketing looks for, and going through some data on what leads to positive and not so positive outcomes, and give you some tips on how I see success happening and unfolding as you approach international marketing research. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time toward the end kind of looking forward and trying to give you some ideas about how to formulate ideas, some things that are kind of top of mind in the international marketing world that I see as broad avenues to help you identify worthy topics to consider for your research agenda. And as David and Ahmet suggested, please send comments to David and questions so that we can address them as we conclude the webinar. So first, about the Journal of International Marketing, for which I took over, I guess it's been almost 2 years now, and I stand very squarely on the shoulders of David Griffith, who is one of the former editors-in-chief of the journal, and for whom I'm eternally grateful. He also serves as an advisor on my advisory board, and Ahmet also serves on my editorial review board. So thanks to both of you for all of your ongoing support. The Journal of International Marketing is positioned as at the intersection of marketing, international marketing theory and practice. And we very much appreciate work that is situated exactly at that intersection. Work that is both rigorous theoretically and conceptually well supported, but that also has implications and results that have meaning and utility, I suppose would be the better word, in marketing practice. So if that is the nature of your work, by all means, consider the Journal of International Marketing. A few stats. I just put together a summary slide of stats before we dig into really what makes for a successful submission to the journal. Our impact factor is 4.575. We publish 4 issues a year with usually 5 papers per issue. And you can expect a relatively speedy review process. Our average is 33 days, including desk rejections. If we remove the desk rejections, because those happen fairly quickly, I try to get to those within the first couple of days of submission so that authors can take the feedback and submit their work elsewhere. If we remove those, our time to decision is still under 50 days. So we're well within a 2-month window if you submit your work to having feedback from us. We are in a growth phase. I'm very happy to say we, over the last couple of years, you can see from 2018 to 19, our submissions grew by 27%. Last year, they grew by another 20%. And this year, we're on par to see at least the same level of submissions, if not further growth. We're also, thankfully, in response to some initiatives, seeing growth in submissions from areas in the world where we have made a concerted effort to try to increase exposure of the journal. And we're seeing growth in submissions from many regions of the world where we have not seen many publications in the Journal of International Marketing. So Eastern Europe, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, India, and the Middle East. And as part of those initiatives to expand our reach, we've also implemented 3 to 4 special issues per year. I'll give you a summary of some upcoming special issues, but to pique your interest, if you're doing work in the area of customer engagement, then we do have a special issue call out at the moment. That deadline is July the 30th, and you can see our website on the slide, ama.org/Journal of International Marketing. And if you'd like more information about that, please, I encourage you to go to the website and take a look at it. And we would love to have you consider JIM for work in that area. Other special issues that are in the process of being pulled together for publication. The first one coming up is on data and methodological issues for new insights in international marketing. That issue will be in September of 2021. And then we have 2 others that will most likely be published in either December or early the following year. So we have a theory and practice in global marketing, which was accompanied by a special conference that took place as an add-on to the Winter AMA, American Marketing Association Conference. We hope that continues as an annual event. They're certainly off to a good start. So you should look for that actual print issue of the journal next year. And we have another special issue that garnered quite a bit of attention, well-being in a global world. We had nearly 40 submissions to that special issue, and you should look forward to seeing that in print. So now on to things that are hopefully helpful to you in attempting to publish in this domain. Some quick stats on our acceptance and reject percentages. You can see I don't have this year's yet. We usually look at these prior to our summer meeting of the American Marketing Association. So I'll be getting these numbers coming up next month. But to give you an idea of what's typical, this is pretty much typical year in and year out. We see about a 32% rejection rate, a 27% desk rejection rate that goes as high as around 30%. That's usually about where we see it. And our acceptance rate, you can see, is pretty similar to the Journal of World Business. We range between 6 and 10%. And just again, to highlight the growth that we're seeing, new submissions for 2019 were 174, 213 for 2020. And as of yesterday, I looked, we're approaching 100, and that's prior to our special issue deadline. So we should see close to this number, if not a little bit more. So one of the recent initiatives that I undertook was to dig into these decisions and look at some of the issues that led to these decisions. So I'll start with desk reject. And by far the biggest reason is that a submission does not fit the scope of the journal. And a lot of times it isn't a marketing question. A lot of times it isn't an international question. Digging into a marketing phenomenon that it doesn't have any cross-national, cross-cultural, any international variables or research questions is generally what accounts for that 67%, but it is a sizable number of these desk rejections that just simply don't fit with the journal. And then we also see significant deficiencies in writing, papers that just pretty much weren't ready for submission. So having someone take a look at your work before you submit it is a really good piece of advice to avoid at least that class of desk rejections. And then we see duplication and plagiarism as well. And so hopefully checking your own papers using software like Authenticate, you should hopefully be able to avoid that as well. Now for some of the other decision categories. So if we look on the right at the reject decisions for papers that make it past that desk reject phase, we can look at the biggest feedback, the biggest category of feedback that authors get if they receive a reject decision is a lack of significant contribution or poor positioning of the paper in terms of what its importance is, the gaps it fills in the international marketing domain, why we need this research. So I would say if to avoid a reject decision, working really hard on crisply and clearly explaining why your study is different, contributes something beyond what we already know and is important, is the number one thing you can do. The second biggest category we see is a lack of conceptual clarity, where we can't understand the reasoning, poor conceptualization of variables, poor or weak theoretical arguments. That would be the second biggest thing that I would encourage you to work on to make sure the reader can follow your arguments and understand what it is you expect and why, and anticipate what it is you're actually going to measure and test when it comes to your actual study design. Now, in terms of revisions, that's a good category. You want a revision, but you can see a big difference. People who receive a revision, by and large, have convinced the reader of the contribution and the importance of the paper, why this is something that's filling a gap and something we need to know or need to know more about. These papers that get a revision tend to have far fewer comments related to clarifying the contribution. However, conceptual clarity remains a significant place where we see the review process aimed at pushing papers forward and helping them improve. And then with revisions, the second biggest category is about complexity in writing, telling a clear and compelling story. So I know those are things that we all have to work on. Those are still things that are hard for me as well, but you can see a big difference. A negative decision is mainly going to be due to not convincing the reader that the paper is doing something important. All right, more data. I dug into, for those papers that did get a positive review outcome over the last year, in 2020, throughout the whole year, what were they about? So this was very much somewhat of a qualitative process, but I went through and categorized topics and then just produced this chart to show sort of where are the positive review outcomes in terms of topics that you might think of working in, or if you want to think about where you're working and if it's a good fit for the journal and what we're looking for, this might give you some guidance. So because some of these are a little faint, I'll kind of take you through the big ones. One of the big topics that seem to have positive review outcomes was focused on emerging markets and bottom of the pyramid contexts. Other big ones were in the area of digital, mobile, and social media. Not surprising. That's a very important topic for the broader marketing domain and international business domain, not necessarily just international marketing, but it follows that that's an area of interest in international marketing as well. We also see a big growth in interest in corporate social responsibility and green marketing as well. So these are probably, the three biggest topics that we saw in terms of these papers making it through the review process positively. Others, the finance international marketing interface remains a really important topic. The finance marketing interface in the broader marketing domain, of course, continues to be an area of importance, just as it is in international marketing. And other long-standing important topics in this domain, brand equity, country of origin studies remain important, and internationalization process, exporting and market entry. And then we see retailing and the use of strategic alliances and joint ventures. So again, just ideas to perhaps, if you're working in any areas related to this, to try to encourage you to think about the Journal of International Marketing for your work, because these seem to be topics that are received very positively. Of course, they have to be well done as well. So with that, I thought I would transition to ideas. How can you be successful in this current day and age, looking ahead as to where, topics of interest, how to generate compelling research ideas. I thought I would spend a few minutes talking about some of these ideas, and we can discuss them a little bit later in the webinar as you have any particular interest. So when I think about areas that are of relevance and continued importance in the broader marketing domain, they also have importance and relevance in the international marketing domain. And I thought we could talk about these three categories just to start a conversation. So first, the digital environment, international marketing in this increasingly digital environment in which we all live. And in terms of international marketing, broad areas of interest where I see a lot of growth potential, omni-channel promotion and distribution. How does that look as the digital environment evolves in markets around the world? Next, customer and firm uses of social and digital media, whether it be for customer relationship building, customer service, communications. We see a lot of growth still, a lot of room for contributing knowledge and extending what we know about marketing in a global environment based on the availability and changes in the digital environment. And then another area to think about, strategies for managing the interface between customers and technology. We all communicate using technology, we shop using technology, we're exposed to it in shopping environments as well as in our homes. How do those issues in an international marketing environment impact strategic decision-making and firms' overall marketing strategies? Another big category to think about in generating ideas of interest is this notion of the customer experience. So we've dedicated a lot of time in understanding the customer experience, the customer journey, customer touch points. How do those issues evolve in the global environment, especially in conjunction with changes in the digital environment as well? So we have dramatically increased the number of touch points customers have with brands and companies and influencers, for example. So how do firms manage those in cross-border environments or cross-cultural environments? And then we think about things like data needs, data consolidation, metrics, how firms gather and interpret information, increasingly complex as you move across borders as well. And then a third area that I think has a lot of room for growth in international marketing is the broad world of corporate social responsibility. We look at things like global supply chain audits and expectations with regards to how providers from around the world behave and the standards they employ for socially responsible behavior. And things broadly, like reducing carbon footprints. How do those translate into sound international marketing strategies that relate to things like brand equity and consumer perceptions, et cetera? So I'll leave you with ideas of where you might generate ideas. And I think I might have shared this with other teams. So thinking about that area of the digital economy, this was something I found interesting, to think about ideas that lack exploration. So I'm showing here the top 10 countries, and I purposely chose a date prior to COVID because this is all out the window now. Looking at e-commerce retail sales as a percentage of total. And you might find it surprising that ours was a little less than 10%, whereas the UK and China both are way ahead of much of the world. But when you overlay that with internet penetration, not e-commerce, we can see some big differences. So while we're much higher in internet penetration than either of these two markets, the UK and China, we have much lower e-commerce. So this caused me to think about why this is. Why do we see these differences? Is it culture? Is it regulation? Is it infrastructure? What are the possible explanations? So again, just conversation starters to get you thinking about potential places where the international marketing domain might be going. Thinking about corporate social responsibility, and we look at interesting things, which also has changed with our change of administration. And if we think about where countries sit in the world in terms, this is just one chart I pulled up, in terms of compliance with the Paris Accord. So here we are, the USA is considered critically insufficient. And we see many countries that are considered compatible that have vastly different culture, infrastructure, and other institutional conditions, consumer attitudes. So what does this mean for your supply chain, for your distribution, for your customer relationships in terms of attitudes about brands, et cetera? So again, conversation starter, ways to get you thinking about where there's room to contribute and how to generate ideas. So with that, I will close and stop sharing so we can move on to our next speaker. And I'll be happy to address any of your questions or comments as we have time later on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a great presentation. Lots of data, a lot of ideas about these sorts of topics. And that's exactly one of the purposes of this webinar. We really want people to hear from you and get inspired and submit papers to your journals. And David just sent a message, and we're getting some great questions. And this is also an opportunity to ask questions to our editors. Please share your thoughts and comments, and certainly your questions. Our next panelist is Professor Vikas Kumar, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Management. Vikas?
Yeah, so fantastic. Thanks a lot, Ahmet. Thanks a lot, David, for organizing this wonderful event. This is, I'm just trying to set the slideshow, and I think I should be fine now. Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Vikas Kumar. I'm Professor of International Business at the University of Sydney School in the discipline of International Business. I took over the editor-in-chief role at the Journal of International Management last January, so January of 2020. So it's been over 1 year, or close to 1.5 years. What I'll do is basically build on what Ajai and Kelly talked about, because a lot, in fact, most of what they said apply equally well to the Journal of International Management. In fact, more so what Ajai was talking about than what Kelly said. But it was a huge learning experience, especially from what Kelly you mentioned. So it's great to know what Journal of International Marketing is doing, and thanks a lot for that. I would actually start off acknowledging my associate editors here, and I know that both Journal of International Marketing and JWB also have a fantastic set of associate editors. The reason why I'm saying this is prior to me taking over the Journal of International Management last year, There were the associate editors in place, but only for, I think, 1 year in 2019. And I do actually think that the team that I've built actually has contributed a lot in generating a lot more papers last year and also this year than what has happened previously. So Lin Chui is one of the associate editors from Australian National University here in Australia, Zilian Deng from Renmin University in China, Desislava Dikova from Vienna, Tazeeb Rajbani from Surrey Business School in the UK, Sumit Kundu from Florida International University, Seong-Hyun Lee from University of Texas, Dallas in US, and Vastaras at University of North Carolina at Greensboro in US. And then I have a set of consulting editors as well. They are also quite geographically dispersed. So Kaz from Japan, Maoling from China, Mehmet from the UK, Stefano Elia from Italy, Snigina from New Zealand, Nitish is from the US. So the point here I want to make is that since I took over in 2020, I did make a concerted effort in internationalizing the team of editors at Journal of International Management. And we have started to see a lot of benefit out of that in terms of submissions, but also in terms of the diversity of locations from which we receive submissions. And also, I would say, in terms of attracting new reviewers for the journal, which is now much widely spread out. So coming to the aims and scope of the journal, and this is where I think the Journal of International Management shares a lot in common with what Ajai was talking about at the Journal of World Business. There are, though, small differences, which Ajai alluded to, and that is something that I can talk about a little bit more in detail. So as you can imagine, Journal of International Management, with international there in the name, publishes theoretical and empirical research addressing issues in management of global enterprises. So the global part is very important. However, I would like to point out that the global enterprises that I and the team actually sees is a little bit more broader or wider in scope than what might actually appear to be the case. So global enterprise does not necessarily only relates to multinational corporations which already have significant presence in multiple countries. It also can actually relate to enterprises which want to actually initiate their globalization process. So some domestic company, but which has a clear agenda, which is almost about to start the international process. And if there is a research around that, that is also something that we would consider, not necessarily that is going to get published, but that is within the scope of the Journal of International Management. We do publish macro and micro level studies. By macro, what I mean is the level of analysis does not necessarily need to be only at the firm level. It could be at the industry level. It could be at the country level. As far as there is a direct implication on international management, on international business, on international strategy of the firm, despite the study being at the country level, we are actually accepting of considering those articles. Similarly, we consider articles which are at the micro level, so studies which are done at the individual level, but have a very clear implication again on the firm level international strategy, international management. We also are a little bit different from Journal of World Business, but also from Journal of International Business Studies, in the sense that we are okay in considering single country studies. So what I mean by that is it obviously cannot just remain a research issue that relates to only one country, but if there is a study which highlights a unique attribute, a unique characteristic, a unique contextual feature of a country, say such as Philippines or Indonesia, just to give you a hypothetical example, which may have implications on how global firms, multinational firms might be able to do business in that country, or in fact that would have an implication on how, say, other firms from other countries and also, say, firms from Indonesia and Philippines would be able to do business outside. that is relevant, that is within the scope of Journal of International Management. So these are some of the things in which we are a little bit more, I would say, open. We are much wider and accommodative of articles. So if you have something in that range, in that scope, you are very welcome to actually send it to Journal of International Management, even though it does not seem like it fits with the typical cross-border research question and research study. We do have a range of different articles, so to speak, which we publish and which we accept. So literature reviews are very common. We don't have a special issue dedicated to literature reviews. Given the number of literature reviews that we receive, we publish it throughout in the different issues that we publish. Once in a while, we do publish critiques and also perspectives. The audience for the Journal of International Management include not only researchers, but also educators and business professionals. And this is where I, along with my team, are trying to make, I would say, a relatively significant departure from what the Journal of International Management has been doing previously. In the sense, we are trying to start off with what Ajai was mentioning, a small corner in the Journal of International Management, which would actually publish very practice-oriented articles. So if you can think of HBR, Harvard Business Review, or the Sloan Management Review, which publishes very practical-oriented articles, this is what we are aiming to do as far as the article is very international business focus. So to give you an example, what kind of articles would actually go into that corner, the practice-oriented corner, would be if there is a rigorous empirical research on, say, internationalization and performance. I picked that because I know Ahmet has done a lot of work in that area. And if you can actually draw down from that particular research, which has been already published in, say, Academy of Management Journal or the Journal of International Business Studies, and you actually relate it with a broad set of research in that area, but draw a conclusion, draw an implication which is very relevant to the practice world, we are very happy to actually consider it and start publishing it. And that actually goes towards one of the problems which very rightfully Ajai pointed out in academia, which is the lack of impact. And I know in the last 20 years that I have been going to conferences, all the editors and all the senior professors have been talking about how our research does not reach to the society, reach to the practice world as we would rightly want them to reach. So this is an effort in that direction, and hopefully that will actually overcome that problem in a small way. I would like to just highlight some of the special issues, the upcoming special issues, but also some of the recent special issues which have closed, with the caveat that these special issues and topics are not only limited to these particular issues that are being worked by a group of different guest editors and which would be published eventually, but these are also signaling to everyone, including all of you, that these are important topics. These are contemporary topics. These are topics which the journal would be very interested in going forward, even outside these special issues. So one of the first one that I want to highlight is titled M&Es and Sustainable Business in Emerging Markets, and the deadline of which is almost about a year from now, so March of 2022. Effective Strategies for Humanitarian Migrants Employment, October 2021. Novel Methodological Approaches to Study Social Political Risk, which is again in October 2021. So what I want to actually highlight with these three specific topics is the importance of context. I and the editorial team at Journal of International Management see a lot of value in the characteristics and the features of the context. And this is what we want to actually highlight through every article, but also through especially the special issues that we come out with. So emerging markets, as Kelly pointed out, is important, and a lot of articles that we receive are in that area, but also a lot of articles that we eventually publish are in that area. So we are going actually more deeper in that and talking about how sustainable business can be managed in these, so to speak, difficult markets. Similarly, the topic of humanitarian migrants employment is something which is very contemporary, I think, very important, and the International Business Journal so far has kind of actually overlooked So we have a fantastic team of guest editors led by Bettina, my colleague here at the University of Sydney, who's going to work on that. As Ajai pointed out, methodology is very important in international business research, and we are actually coming up with a special issue here, which deal with the methodological approaches to study a specific contextual aspect, that of socio-political risk. Some of the recently closed special issues also kind of highlight the importance of context. So the first one is to do with, which just recently closed. It has not obviously been published as yet. The impact of digital technologies in firms' international strategy. This is something which is becoming quite big, as also Kelly pointed out, in international marketing. This is something that I see articles coming in, obviously, on a consistent basis. So beyond the special issue, I think the special issue has definitely promoted this topic, brought it to the awareness of everyone. And I think this is definitely one of the big research topics in the coming future. The other one, which is not so contemporary, but I think which is quite important, is to do with the Central and Eastern Europe transformation, and taking a fresh look again after 30 years of the major liberalization or major transformation that happened. This should be out soon. Just a quick information about the metrics of the journal. In 2020, as I was mentioning, we received a lot more articles than previously. As you can see from the orange bar here, in 2020, we received close to, I would say, 30% more articles than in 2019. This is definitely attributable to, I would say, the big diverse team that we have at the Journal of International Management. That trend is continuing in 2021. So already we have received 219 articles, and that means that by the end of the year, we would be well underway of having a 30% increase in the total number of submissions. Unfortunately, the rejection rate is quite high, and I think this is not very uncommon amongst all the top journals, so it's close to 65%. But the good thing is, as Ajai pointed out again, that once your article gets into the review process, the acceptance rate is nowhere close to what you typically see, which is 6 to 10% or 5 to 10%. It is much, much higher. So you should actually feel very, very encouraged in submitting your articles to Journal of International Management, as well as to the other journals, obviously making sure that it fits in with the objectives of the journal. One thing I wanted to point to is also the submitted articles by country and region. What I wanted to highlight is or break the myth that the articles continue to come from only North America and Europe. While that is the case for Journal of International Management, it is definitely North America and Europe, but there is clearly an increase in the number of articles coming from Asia. That does not reflect equally well in terms of the number of acceptances, but the fact that more and more authors are submitting from Asia, I see it as a good thing. In terms of the speed with which we actually process articles, I would say we are amongst the best in the sense we are fairly quick. So you would see the submission, the time taken from submission to final publication, which is the last bar in the 2021, which is 64 weeks. It's obviously quite a bit of time, but see, this is just over a year from when an article, which is obviously a successive article, is submitted, and finally it is available online for everybody to read and for everybody to cite. We are doing fairly well on the other metrics as well, in terms of submission to rejection, submission to first decision, and submission to the virtual publication. Jim has, Journal of International Management has a general impact factor of 3.821, which again was an increase of about 30% from the previous impact factor score. So more importantly, it is on the rise. The number of submissions are increasing, the impact factor has increased. The rank of the journal is 60 out of the 226 in the management category. The 5-year impact factor is 3.977. So all of these metrics actually suggest that the journal is actually a good international business journal, and that is something for you guys to actually consider. One thing I want to point out, which I'm making actually a change of, is the number of articles which actually get published in the journal. So this chart shows you the number of citable items published in different journals in international business. And this is where the Journal of International Management falls way behind, I would say, some of the other journals, particularly International Business Review and Journal of World Business. So in 2020, I have made a concerted effort in actually publishing significantly more articles. Not that the quality is actually compromised in any bit, but my thinking is there's clearly a lot more good articles than just 34 that can get into the Journal of International Management. And I think with a bigger team that is being able to get achieved. Quickly again, if you look, and I know that we're going to share these slides so you can go through it in greater detail. If you look at some of the more impactful articles that have been published in the Journal of International Management, again, what you would see is that the context plays a huge role. So for example, one of the most cited articles in the recent time in the Journal of International Management is that on the sharing economy globalization phenomena. So that is something which, again, I see as very context specific. This is something which is actually happening all around the world, and this is an important phenomena. Similarly, the next article, which is actually coincidentally by Ajai, is titled Governance, Structure, Innovation, and Internationalization, and it is actually embedded in the context of India. So context, again, here plays an important role in not only getting through the Journal of International Management, but also finally making a big impact through the number of citation count that we can see. So I'd like to end on just one takeaway that I'd leave you guys with. For the Journal of International Management, but I also think for many of the international business and management journals, which is if you can focus on leveraging the disconnect between what we already know, which is from the received wisdom, and I would say fortunately and unfortunately, and justifiably so, a large amount of that received wisdom is based on data and research that has happened in the developed market. If you can actually leverage that, the disconnect that exists between the received wisdom and the new phenomena, and try to actually explain that with some uniqueness of the context that is being studied. That could be a context which relate to the industry, context relating to the time, context relating to the country. I think you would be up for something very interesting. You would be up for something not only interesting that gets published, but also something which you can actually create an impact with. So thanks a lot. I'll end here, and I'll let the more interesting part to begin, which is the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for these great presentations. Before we move on to the questions, I would really like to use this opportunity to thank our editors for joining us today, but also for the service they do for the IB community. It's a tough job, and just for that, they deserve a lot of credit. Thank you very much. That's really, I mean, for former editors as well, that includes David. But certainly this is a lot of work. As someone who served as a special issue editor for a couple of journals in the past, I know that it's really a lot of work. And thank you very much for all the work that you're doing for the academic community. So David, well, take it away if you have any questions, and I'm sure a lot of questions have been coming through. So please.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. So let me get started right away. So this is going to be for each of the editors. I'd ask that we go in order. Qualitative research is extremely important, however, oftentimes has challenges in the review process. What are the most frequent problems in publishing qualitative research in the IB journal? So I'd ask each editor maybe to take your top 2 or 3 most important piece of advice on this. And we'll just go in the same order, Ajai, Kelly, and then Vikas.
So, in one sentence, the biggest nemesis of qualitative research is qualitative researchers themselves. And I'm saying from the point of view of, when the paper goes out to reviewers, it goes out to qualitative reviewers, obviously, and they pick out the problems more than, when the paper goes out to quantitative reviewers. But in terms of, how to publish qualitative studies in IB journals, there are a couple of things. One thing is, as I mentioned in my presentation, to have a connect between your research question and the method. So if you're trying to study things like, for example, subsidiary processes, how do teams engage in the knowledge transfer processes and so on. Many of these things, qualitative research is the only way out to study them. So if you have the right question and you are approaching that with qualitative study, that's the first step that you are crossing in that. And then beyond that, it's a matter of rigor. Qualitative research is not just about storytelling, it's also about providing evidence, which many times qualitative researchers kind of ignore, and they write well and so on, but the evidence part is missing, which might be in the form of quotes, the snippets, and so on. And then beyond that, that's just data, right? So research has to then lead to that. Data has to lead to some first order constructs, some second order constructs, and so on. And then all of that has to lead to some, depending on what approach you are taking, whether it is grounded theory based approach or you're looking more from the positivist perspective, theory testing. Many of these things, many qualitative researchers ignore, and which is where they face problems in publishing. And therefore, I would say, in fact, qualitative research in many ways is actually easier to publish because there is relatively less competition if you're doing that job in the right way.
Kelly?
Sure, and I would concur with the overall sentiment of the method needs to suit the research question, and if it is a method that is almost interpreted as one of convenience, as opposed to, like, we couldn't get the quantitative data to test this question, that doesn't mean that it's the right method. That doesn't mean you're going to get a pass. So thinking very carefully before employing a qualitative approach that the research question warrants that approach is probably the number one piece of advice. And the other, depending on, as Ajai said, whether you are, if it's a grounded theory type issue, as opposed to a positivist or a testing type question, the data have to be appropriate for that. And I don't know that those issues differ in the international environment as opposed to a purely domestic or single country environment. I don't know that those issues would be any different. The challenge of data, of gathering data, of getting good data in a cross-country, cross-national environment, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, I think it is equally difficult. So I would say rigor, appropriateness to the question, all of those things are exactly the same, in my opinion, as they would be in a single market.
So just building on that, I would just highlight one aspect, what I see in the articles that are coming into the Journal of International Management. I find that it's easier for quantitative studies to follow the state of art. It is not so easy, or at least it's not that common, for the qualitative studies to follow state of art. I see a lot of deviation in the qualitative studies from what we already know about qualitative studies should be doing. And that basically just lowers the rigor of those qualitative studies. And that is the number one problem of qualitative studies not going through as easily, if we can actually say that, compared to the quantitative studies.
Excellent. Our next question. What advice would you have for a PhD student or a junior faculty member submitting to your journal for the first time? And given that there could be differences across journals, we'll once again sort of do a round robin and start with Ajai.
All right, the first advice would be not just for the PhD students, for everyone, and that would be read the journal. That's very important if you are submitting to the journal. And this is, common mistake which people make, even the experienced scholars. And when I'm saying read the journal, essentially what I mean is participate in the debate that is happening in the journal. If you cannot participate in that debate through your paper, then there is already a mismatch. Your paper is not suitable for that journal. So that would be the starting point. You should be able to find in the recent 5 years at least 5 key references that should help you position your paper for that journal. If that is not happening, then either you are not doing your groundwork properly, or that is not the suitable journal for you.
I would concur. I think that, just going to the data that I shared on the number one reason for a desk rejection is the lack of fit with the journal. So the very first thing I would say is make sure that your study does in fact fit the journal. And if you need to work on repositioning it, take the time to do that. Have someone else look at your paper before you submit it for the very first time. And if I think about things that I see in submissions from people who are very new to the research process relative to others, one of the things that stands out to me is a good submission to a journal is very different than, say, your dissertation, in that your job is not to convince us that you've read everything under the sun about a topic. And so you have a lit review that's 18 pages long, rather that your research question is contributing to the field in which the journal is based. So, peel back the lit review, and we're less concerned that you've read everything again under the sun than that your problem that you're addressing in your research is important and is something novel that fits well with the journal. Those would be my pieces of advice.
So journals should be seen as conversations that researchers, that academics are actually engaging in, and PhD students, new ECRs, what we call, or anyone should actually participate in those conversations. In order to participate in those conversations, you've got to actually know what the conversation is. And in that sense, you've got to build on something that is there in that journal. And that is also a fantastic way of actually helping out the editors in finding the most suitable reviews for your article. So not only that you would actually submit a very good, nicely polished work, but you would also help yourself by being able to reach your article to the most suitable reviewer.
Excellent. Our next question, in this one, I think once again is appropriate for all three editors. What are the key issues leading to manuscript rejection at the second or third round? Not the first round, but the second or third round. So without identifying authors or papers, Ajai?
So, reviewers' comments, obviously, and oftentimes, in fact, when editors give the revise and resubmit, you do try and make an assessment whether the authors will be able to take it to the end point. But sometimes you do not have enough information. So, for example, if the comments or the reviewers' feedback is about some kind of new analysis or some kind of additional data, we don't, we'll give you a chance, and by you, I mean the authors. We'll give authors the chance to see whether they can take it to that level. But sometimes they're not able to, and that's when the paper will be rejected. And likewise, about the theoretical contribution, the first round of the papers are often rough, and that's all right. We give a chance for authors to sort of take it to the next level. And oftentimes, they fail to take it to that level, which is expected of a particular journal, right? That's where there's a space for every article somewhere, but it may not be, in that particular journal. And this is where I would also want to, talk about, there's this proverbial reviewer 2 who always rejects the paper, but then there's also this reviewer 1 who always accepts the paper, and yet papers are rejected, right? And that's very important, because, reviewers' feedback is only guidance to the editors. At Journal of World Business, I'm sure at many other journals, I often tell my editors that it's perfectly okay to accept a paper which all of the reviewers have rejected, and vice versa. You have to see the value as editor in the paper, and that's where these contributions and these issues may not be very clear in the very first round. We give a chance, but if that does not come out in, let's say, second round, or hopefully it should be reject after second round if it's still not clear. Later rounds are more about polishing.
Kelly?
Yes, I think really good advice. I think one of the things that I see, if I'm just going to point to something that stands out as coming up when things are rejected later on, number one would be lack of responsiveness to the reviewers, and treating the second round as almost, oh, I've got my foot in the door, I just need to do some superficial things. You really need to treat that first revision, the second round submission, as carefully as you treated the first one in preparing it. And the best thing about it is you have guidance. So take it seriously. And just as Ajai said, I've had numerous cases where I and the AE chose to give a paper a chance, even though 2 out of the 3 reviewers suggested that it be rejected, because we saw a nugget of something there. But we're putting the onus back on the authors to bring that paper up to the caliber that the other 2 reviewers that rejected it can buy into. And so that is completely on the authors to take it seriously, look at those critical review comments and see them as an opportunity to make your paper better and take it seriously. That would be my advice.
So I think this is where the job of the editors is becoming tougher and tougher. Invariably, the reviews that come in are more leaning towards a reject than to accept, however constructed they are. Obviously, I concur and agree with all what Kelly and Ajay mentioned. Just building further on that, I think one of the reasons why a review gets rejected, a paper which is actually under review or second round, is some of the things which the authors have not been able to do, what the reviewers have suggested, is not justified sufficiently well. And it is perfectly fine for authors to not be able to do everything that is being said, but it is not perfectly fine to just let it go and try to ignore that. We editors, at least the handling editors, do mention that you don't have to agree and revise every little bit, but the ones that you don't, you should provide a justification for that.
Excellent. So the next one is, it's a lot of different questions all together. So I tried to bundle it into one theme, and I'd ask we go together sort of in sequence, because it's kind of about the technical inner workings of your process. Being an editor is an extremely challenging job. How are papers handled at your journal? Who chooses the reviewers? How are reviewers selected? Are the AEs aware of who the authors are, or is authorship blind to the AE? And then ultimately, who makes the real decision? And I know you're going to say you are, but are there ever disagreements where you overrule the AE? So a lot of kind of technical sort of the process at each journal. Ajay?
Yeah, at the Journal of World Business, we have the first stop is managing editor, who would check it for plagiarism and stuff like that. If you have your author identifying information, a basic thing, she'll send the paper back. Let's say it goes from the managing editor, then we have a reviewing editor. And at reviewing editor level, we have a large number of rejections. Stab Frenchmate is the reviewing editor for Journal of World Business, and he works very closely with me in the sense that, on my papers, he would consult me whether we should keep this paper for review or just reject. So in between him and myself, he would reject about 60% of the papers in terms of desk rejection. And then for the remaining, I'll have a closer look at them to see which of the senior editor would fit with those remaining articles. And then I will, with my comments, I will send that paper to the senior editor. In my comments, oftentimes I also suggest some of the reviewers. But yes, those papers are not blind to the senior editors or associate editors. They can see the authors and they can see all of the cover letter and so on, the reviewers you have suggested, and then they take the paper forward. The reject decisions directly go from the senior editors. The final accept decisions come to my desk before they are communicated to the reviewers. And in some instances, I have kept the paper under revision for some more rounds if I see that some more things need to be addressed. Oftentimes they are minor in nature than really major. But this is a little bit different when you deal with the special issues, because oftentimes the special issue editors may not be in sync with the overall standards of the journal and so on. And and that's the situation where it becomes a little bit more difficult, because the special issue editors might actually accept the paper, but we end up rejecting. In fact, in one of the special issues, I ended up rejecting the introductory paper by the guest editors themselves because it did not meet the standards of the journal. So that's where there's more oversight needed. But with the editors, we are quite comfortable, and I do not usually need to reverse their decisions. We do discuss the decisions, in the case of controversial decisions, and we reach consensus. And if there's need, we consult some other editors within the team make a decision. To reiterate the previous point, it's not always just based on the reviewer feedback. We reject the papers we accept the papers we reject the papers which are accepted by the reviewers and vice versa. So yeah.
So for JIM, as papers come in, the managing editor for the American Marketing Association checks them for plagiarism and then sends me alerts as to whether or not that could be an issue. But beyond that, I make the first pass solely myself. So for every paper that is submitted, I actually open it and read it. What I tend to do is read the introduction, maybe the first 5 or 6 pages to make sure it's positioned, that it fits the journal. And then I'll skip to the methods to see if the data also, sometimes people aren't selling the international nature of their project, but the data will show that it indeed has international variables. And so then you have the opportunity to counsel someone on positioning their study, that sort of thing. And at that point, I make a reject decision if it doesn't fit or if it's so poorly done or some major flaw. And then I select an AE, but I make the reviewer selections and I make them with regard to both fit with expertise related to content and methodology. So I'm looking for at least one methodological expert and at least one subject matter expert. And another reviewer who fits either one of those, and leaning more toward the subject matter, so they understand whether there's a contribution there and how to counsel the authors on how to contribute to the field. Then from that point, the reviews come back, the AE writes me a recommendation, and I either can consult with the AE. For example, I had a paper where it had interesting data, was from an area of the world that we very rarely see. Even though it had some issues, I thought, okay, well, if the AE can see the vision that I have, maybe we can kind of handhold this paper a little bit through the process. And it wasn't based on the person or anything, just that this was a really interesting idea and really cool data that were rare. So the AE and I kind of worked together. When it got to say round 4, yes, it took that long. We typically can after 2 or 3 rounds make a decision, but this was one that just needed some extra help. The AE and I were the only ones reading the paper at that point. So, I see the AEs as part of my team, helping me either nurture or make decisions, but I will make the ultimate decision on papers. And I believe that touched on how things work and how decisions are made. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Vikas?
So at Journal of International Management, the first point is me. I would actually check for plagiarism. I would check for fit, and I would make the desk reject decision. The ones that actually have to go through would then by me be assigned to the associate editors. I keep a lot of articles with myself. And then I distribute and try to distribute it as equally as possible to my associate editors. It's the associate editors who would be actually looking for reviewers and then making a final decision. Similar to what Ajai mentioned, the reject decision is made directly from the associate editors to the authors. The accept decision goes through me. It's only in rare situations that I would change the decision or the recommendation of the associate editors. On many occasions, though, the associate editors have discussed with me when there's a problematic paper. So when what Ajai was mentioning, when you have all the reviewers negative, but the associate editor still sees a value in that paper and in pushing forward, or the other way around. So that is where we engage in discussions and we make basically a decision after the discussion that we had.
Excellent, thank you. So to try to keep us on time and get in as many questions as possible, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose one question to each editor. As I go editor to editor with different questions, feel free to circle back if you want to make a comment on the other one. So we're going to start with Ajai, which is oftentimes reviewers identify the same problem, but give you very conflicting ways to solve those problems. How do you deal with these conflicting reviewer comments?
So this is a very interesting question, because this is where the role of the editor is to resolve those conflicts for the authors. And the decision letters from Journal of World Business are relatively long, and the reason is not to be additional reviewer for the authors, but to provide some clear guidance, especially when this sort of conflicting demands from posed by the authors. So editors would try and resolve them in their letters, and authors are welcome to consult the editors if it's not clearly resolved in the letters.
Excellent. Kelly, all of the editors have mentioned fit with the journal. How do I, as a junior author, recognize if my paper is going to have a good fit with the journal?
I think the number one thing you could do is ask someone who's published in the journal to look at a minimum, your introduction and your abstract to see if they think it's a good fit. But as Ajai mentioned earlier, reading the journal to convince yourself. If you can't find other papers that you can cite that are related to your paper within the last 7-8 years in the journal, then that's where I would begin to question. So that's some advice.
Oh, that's excellent. That's going to jump me to a different question that someone put in. So this goes to Vikas, but it builds upon Kelly's issue. What advice for publishing do you have on new topics, such as the interaction between international business, artificial intelligence, and machine learning? So you're really trying to forge new ground that hasn't been published in the journal before. What advice would you have?
I think those are the most interesting topics that I would be interested in, and as well as many other journals would be interested in. I think the point here would be to make a very solid case. So obviously linking with the international business aspect of that research, why that is important. I think so the first part, so obviously the introduction is important in this particular scenario where there's a relatively new topic being proposed. It's even more important that the first 2 paragraphs become really important and really well thought through. So this is where I think multiple rounds of actually editing and feedback would help the authors.
Excellent. So we'll go into our next question. All of the editors have spoken to the issue of plagiarism. How is plagiarism, I guess, assessed or reviewed or evaluated when a paper is submitted? Ajai?
Well, I mean, we have softwares these days, so it's very easy to identify plagiarism. They would, those softwares would tell you at a broad level, let's say 30% or 25%, but we don't go by the percentage. Then we would look at, specifically what is common, because they would also identify the sources from which, things are common. And if you see that there are, full sentences which are common between a published source and, what you have submitted, sometimes even full paragraphs, then that's an example of plagiarism. Of course, you can have as much as 40% commonality, but that commonality might be simply in references, and that's not plagiarism. And if there is plagiarism, then we don't. There's no leniency in that. Oftentimes, it's a straight reject. Sometimes, if we see that this article has been submitted by a young scholar, and the plagiarism is more in the methods, and that might have happened by error, we give a chance to correct that. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So building on that, Kelly, outside of plagiarism, what other academic integrity issues do you deal with within the journal, within the review process?
So the use of the same data across studies, because we're an American Marketing Association journal, we adhere to the standards for issues such as plagiarism and other ethical issues. And that is one. So the AMA has policies with regard to, if you're using something like CompuStat or other secondary sources, then that's not an issue. But let's say you conducted a primary survey and you're trying to use the exact same variables in 2 papers. The AMA has simply said, we don't want to publish papers of that nature. And so the AEs are aware of that, and they're looking for what's cited and, are the data overlapping with other studies. And yes, we deal with that every now and then.
Excellent. Okay, so Vikas, still in the same theme, there is increasing concerns about replication of research in the discipline. I mean, and Ajai talked about the replication section in JWB. How are you ensuring that the findings you're publishing in your journal are valid?
So obviously that is a methodology issue. And this is where the reviewers and the editors are most helpful in making sure that the findings that are there are robust. In many instances, we do actually ask for further tests. with the data that is there. In some instances, we also ask for expanding or adding new data to that. In studies, particularly that you're mentioning, where we have some doubt about the relevance and the robustness of the data. So it is basically a review process through which we make sure that the data is really valid. Just quickly, if I can touch upon the plagiarism, because that's an interesting one. There's a lot of cases of self-plagiarism, and in many cases, the authors are not aware. And I would say what is very specific to many of the PhD students is where the thesis has to be by rule published on the university website. And the iAuthenticate or the plagiarism software picks that up. And that is where discussion has happened many instances with me, and where I would have to specifically request the author to take down those thesis or reports which are publicly available, or make it actually password locked.
Excellent. Well, at this point, it is 7:30, which is our end time. And so I would say thank you all for the panelists for joining us. I'll turn it over to my co-host, Ahmet, for any concluding comments. Thank everyone for joining us. It's wonderful to have you all here. Ahmet?
David, thank you very much for putting all these questions together. And thanks, of course, to our panelists. This was a great discussion, and thank you for providing useful insights and tips related to best practices for publishing international research topics, as well as providing promising directions for future research. It seems like we might do a follow-up webinar to address some of those issues that have not been addressed, because there were a lot of questions I know you got, and we answered a lot of questions, but there are still some that we might want to address in another panel possibly. So again, thank you for joining us today. I would like to thank the participants for joining us for this interesting panel and asking great questions. And of course, our panelists, the editors of the Journal of International Management, Journal of World Business, and Journal of International Marketing. Thank you very much. As a final note, I'd like to announce that we have already started working on our next panel. Our second event will focus on the topic of the use of cultural distance in international business research, and it will be on September 7th, 2021. We will widely promote this event as well, but please mark your calendars. We're looking forward to seeing you again in one of our events in the future. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks and gig 'em, as we say here at Texas A&M. Have a great evening, have a great morning, have a great day, everyone.